And just so everyone knows, we are on YouTube right now. And Jeremy, if you can switch Bethany back over to the host.
Bethany, are you online? Can you hear me?
I'm on.
Oh, there's a bad echo. Okay.
Yeah, Bethany, if you could help admit some of the members who are signing in online. You're more familiar with the committee members, and I'm not sure who some of the Zoom logins are.
Hello, Bethany is here. She's in the room with us at police headquarters. We fixed the echo problem. Do you hear this okay?
Perfect. Yes, that's good.
Bethany, can you hear me? Can you see some of the members who are signing in onto Zoom? You're on mute.
Go ahead.
Can she not hear me?
She can hear you now.
Jennifer, I can't unmute my laptop because there's a feedback because I'm in the same room as everybody else.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm admitting people as they're popping up and I see the name that I recognize.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Bob, can you hear us now?
You want to unmute it?
Miss Fielding, did you get a hold of Bob to see what his problem was?
I did. I think he's, from what I see, let's see. From looking in the chat, he says he can see everyone. He's just not hearing anything. So Paul did let him know that we're getting audio set now. Hey, Doris.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good, you surviving?
Good, good. Yeah, hanging in there. I see Paul. Let's see, who's that? Anna? Hi there. That's Anne. Now, who else? Camden is there. Well, it's 5:35. Bethany, would you like to let us go on and proceed? And you all can continue to take care of getting everyone set in. Would that work? Bethany, you're on mute.
Yeah. We can go ahead and get started. I have the roll in front of me.
Okay, good deal. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Citizens Police Advisory Council meeting for the City of Charleston. Welcome to this new virtual experience. I hope everyone is comfortable with this, and thank you so very much to Bethany and to Steve Romelin for getting this set up with Captain Thompson. So Bethany, if you would please call the roll for us.
Yes, ma'am. District 1, Frank Walsh.
Here.
District 2, Ryan Davis.
Here.
District 3, Twan Fielding.
Here.
District 4, Mary Alice Beck.
Here.
District 5, Paul Tamburino.
Here.
District 6, George Palmer.
Here.
District 7, Kevin Smith. It will not be in attendance tonight. District 8, Ann Janice.
Here.
District 9, Melvin Ezel Jr. I remember seeing him on there.
He's connecting.
Okay. District 10, Camden Nora Shields. District 11, J. Robert Haley. District
I
12,
Bethany, I believe Camden, I see them, Camden, and I thought Bob was on as well.
okay.
Okay.
District 12, Doris Grant.
Here.
High school senior, Sydney Clinton. Max Milliken.
Here.
Joe Lasat. Jerome Harris.
Here.
Oh. And Chris Russo. All right.
Hey, Twan, I just want to let you know I'm here.
Oh, that's good.
Who's that?
That's me, Twan. I don't think I had it muted the first time. Camden.
Okay, that's what I thought. I saw you in there. Okay,
Thanks.
thank
Sorry.
you. Bethany, that's okay. Bethany, you did get Camden, he is present, right?
I did, yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. Now we have at the line item of approval of minutes, we have a number of sets of minutes that we have not been able to get approved. So Bethany is going to forward those sets of minutes to everyone. We ask that you would please read those. And during our next meeting, we will have approval of minutes on the agenda. And at that time, we'll take care of all of the minutes. Is everyone, council members, are you satisfied with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. Now, this is the time, the citizens participation period. Fortunately, we have received a number of comments online, and I've asked Bethany if she would please share those with us. Council members, you received a link today with those very detailed comments included. And I believe we had one person who had requested to speak. Bethany, were we able to get the phone number for that person?
We were, although I don't see it in the waiting room.
Bethany, this is Jennifer. She did sign in. Her name was Emily Walter, but I don't see her on the call right now. I don't see her name listed.
Okay.
I'm looking for it now. So I think she may have signed off.
Okay.
Would you be able to let us know if, should she sign back on?
Yes,
We
ma'am.
can certainly get her to speak with us at that time to share her comments at that time.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you. Thanks so very much.
And Twan, Steve wanted me to announce, just for anybody who is listening in from the public, this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube currently. So if you did want to watch it on YouTube, you can do that.
And Madam Chairwoman, this is Jennifer. I see Miss Walter now listed.
Okay,
So I'm going to go ahead and unmute her. Miss
Great.
Walter, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. Can you guys hear me?
yes, we can. Welcome to our meeting and thank you so much for signing in to speak with us. Please
Yeah,
feel free now at this time to speak up and share your comments with us.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's Emily. I'm a resident in Charleston. On Sunday, May 31st, I was at a protest in Marion Square. As everyone is well aware, it was a protest against police brutality that was met with police violence. However, what took place after the protest was an act that violated the rights of residents of the East Side community. Law enforcement agencies descended into the predominantly Black neighborhood, blocked off streets with their military vehicles, ordered citizens to go inside their homes, despite the fact that the curfew was poorly advertised and hastily put into place, and threw tear gas canisters into groups of people that included children and elders. Despite call-outs from grassroots leaders, a press conference, and letters from local organizations, the Charleston Police Department, the response from the city has lacked integrity, urgency, and is disrespectful to the community members of the East Side. The police violence witnessed was not an anomaly. Police have and continue to be harmful to marginalized communities in Charleston and across the country. We must go beyond a public apology to actionable steps that the police department will take to ensure this will never happen again. There should be funding reserved and freely given to the East Side to provide their residents with much needed resources. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for sharing. And I hope you're able to continue in your attendance at the meeting tonight. I've asked Bethany if she would please read the other comments that we have received as well to the council and all those listening.
Yep. Twan, do you want the full comments or would you like a summary?
You prepared a summary. Let's see, council members, have you gotten a chance to see the comments that have been submitted? We had somewhere between 30 and 35 comments, I believe, which is good, healthy discussion for us. Council members, what is your pleasure?
We've read them. I've read them. I see what they are.
Madam Chair, I've read them and I believe they should just be included into the minutes without further reading. I think the summarization of them is pretty consistent across the spectrum.
Okay. Any other feedback, members?
When were they sent?
The link was sent to us today. Oh, I hear an echo. Is that me? Let me try it again.
No, you're fine. Ms. Grant, the comments, we posted the link for the public to comment on Thursday afternoon, I believe. And we've received approximately 30 to 35 comments since then. About half of them are all stating about the same thing.
I'll tell you what, Bethany, Steve is there with you too, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, Steve, if you would, you categorize the comments that we received. And then if you would tell those major categories, and then Bethany, if you would read us from your summarization, I think that would be very informative for the council, as well as the community members that are listening in as well. Are you able to do that?
Yeah, I can give you my general breakdown. I went through all the comments and tried to categorize them as best I could. There were 12 comments specific to reallocation of public funds from the police budget to other programs such as community programs, housing, education, those sorts of things. There were 10 comments regarding our response to the protests on the weekend of May 30th and 31st, along the lines of what the caller had mentioned about the response. There were 5 comments regarding defunding the police department. There was 1 comment in favor of diverse recruiting practices for officers. There was 1 comment in favor of de-escalation training for officers. There was 1 comment in favor of community policing for officers. There was 1 comment that had to do with policing for profit. And the gist of that was the perception that police were pulling people over for minor offenses to write them tickets, and that the city benefited from the money that they got from that. There was 1 that touched on the legalization of drugs and diverting youth away from drug dealing and into other areas of being able to make a living. 1 had to do with Black Lives Matter. 1 had to do with access to this meeting as to why this wasn't, people couldn't see us and could only hear us. I think we talked about the YouTube link. There was 1 that was critical of the mayor, saying that he argued against the audit when it was initially presented to council and the mayor. There was 1 related to disparate treatment of a Black victim in an investigation that occurred 9 years ago. There was 1 that had to do with Elijah Witherspoon, which I believe was a gentleman that passed this past weekend in Mount Pleasant, and they're investigating that incident. And then there was 1 person who offered to help fund body-worn cameras and body protection for CBD officers.
Thank you, Steve.
SDNR is investigating that.
Chief, would you repeat that? I didn't hear that.
I know because it's gotten so much attention. The death is being investigated by South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. A lot of people, I think, thought it was Mount Pleasant, but I just wanted to clarify that it is actually DNR that's investigating that death.
Okay. Thank you.
And Twan, this is Bethany. Steve actually did a better job summarizing than I would have. I just, I took the comments in their full and kind of put them down into little breakdown of sentences. So that was a much better summary than what I would have done.
What I would like to do, though, is ask each council member to please make sure you review all of the comments in their entirety. And would you please, by the middle of next week, send to Steve, Bethany, and me items that you think we need to have on the next meeting's agenda to address those comments. I would hate for, I appreciate the fact that the community has sent us a number of comments for us to digest. I've looked at them. Many of them are centered around some of what we have on tonight's agenda, but there is room for other items that we have not considered for tonight's agenda. And I think it would really be good for us to address those concerns that are raised as well. So council members, are you able to do that? Review those comments and then provide whatever agenda items you feel we should have on the next meeting's agenda to ensure that we are addressing the concerns of the community?
Yes.
Okay. Is that everyone? Now you can vote. You can put a thumbs up. You can raise your hand or put a thumbs up in the, I don't know what means you're using, but if you click on more, if you're on your phone, you can raise your hand there as well as vote or send me a thumbs up. Okay. Ann and Bob, are you good with it?
Yes.
Okay. Bob, I'm looking at you. You're good? Okay. Oh, some of us aren't showing our faces too, huh? Okay. Okay, I'm good with that. Thanks, Camden. Yes, and you can also put it in the chat room too. Okay. Thank you. And again, community, please continue to send us your comments and concerns. We really want this. We want to make sure that we are sharing with the police department the concerns that community has. Because after all, our goal is to work towards having harmony between the police department and the community, the police department being more understanding and of the community, and the community understanding the police department. And so we can work harmoniously together to have a true community police relationship that protects and respects all. Okay? Okay. Any other comments there before we go to the updates? Thank you. Now, Chief Reynolds is going to introduce to us, uh-oh, I hear someone else. Okay. Chief is going to come and introduce to us Wendy and Michael, and then share with us I think they're going to present to us the goals and focus of their jobs. Chief?
Thank you so much. It's been a very busy month, and it's great to see everyone. And I want to say thank you to Michael Tito and Steve Rumlin and others who kind of helped us. I think we have a full committee or close. We may still have an opening or two, but when we met in January, we really had a lot of work to do to get with our council members and make sure we had a representative in all of our positions. And I think we're close now. So we have a quorum. And so we just have so much to talk about. I want to thank Twan, your leadership. It's a big commitment, especially now. A lot of things to talk about, a lot of discourse, a lot of debate, a lot of dialogue that we need to lean into. And I think we need to create work groups, and you'll hear a lot more tonight about very specific work, very specific recommendations. And I'll start that with my introductions of Wendy Stiver, who is the Director of Procedural Justice and Policy here in the department. I'll let her introduce herself. She comes here with a lot of experience. In January, we didn't have these positions filled. We'd just gotten the budget approved. We did an announcement. We did a very competitive process. And we got 2 people outside the department with extensive experience. And I'll start with Wendy, who's going to be in charge of the audit. And she's already hit the ground running and has done a lot of work.
Thank you, Chief. First of all, I'm sorry.
We can hear you.
Okay. First of all, I'm really, really grateful to be here. I started here in Charleston on April 6th. Obviously, that was after we kind of started shutting things down for the pandemic. So it's been a challenge to learn the city and learn the department through Zoom and conference calls, but we have made a lot of progress. So I don't know if you want me to share my screen or if you've got the ability to put my presentation up.
I think we'll do that next, Wendy. If you just want to do a brief introduction of yourself, and then we'll let Mike go, and then we'll let you do your presentation.
Okay. Well, so basically I retired from the Dayton Police Department, Ohio in March. My background is a little bit focused on evidence-based policing and kind of the cross-section of research and practice in policing. And so I'll get into that a little bit more in the presentation. That's about it.
Wendy's humble. She's got 21 years in Dayton, Ohio Police Department. She retired as a major. She held just about every position in the department, not the least of which was the chief of staff. And she's done a lot with NIJ, with the ICP, with PERF, with major cities, and other police professional entities. She's taught at the college level. She's overseen, among other things, the business district, where she prepared and had officers relationally connected to the businesses where they had a major event in downtown. They had an active shooter where they responded within, I think, 30 seconds, were able to address that threat. And she's done a lot of things in the research entity. She's done a lot of things with data analytics, and a lot of different projects that translate very well. So not only is she an academician, she's a practitioner, and she's able to blend all those things. And she came here just for this position. And we're very excited. She's hit the ground running. The next person I want to introduce is Mike Gillily, who's here in person. And he comes from Arizona and has also had a full career and excelled and has been up through the command ranks and has a lot of experience, among other things, in internal affairs, in policy, in a lot of operational entities, but in a lot of administrative duties, and comes here again, has been here for a few years, actually is somewhat rooted here, and was not enjoying just voting and relaxing. He really wanted to get back in the game, and we're very excited to have him here. And he's, among other things, looking at policy, audit, compliance, all the things that we've talked about with this audit, all the things that the nation is crying for right now with reform, real change, meaningful outcomes, changes in policy, changes in training, changes in how we do our internal affairs investigations, making sure that we have a culture of accountability and transparency, that we're doing the right things for the right reasons, not just creating new policies, but actually having an organization that is doing what it says it wants to do, that is taking the input, just like we're beginning to do tonight, what we've started in this committee. These are two people who are really going to help us get that translated into different outcomes. So sorry to give you all that segment.
Thank you, Chief. I'm honored actually to be a member of the Charleston Police Department now, and to help build upon the successes and the foundational building blocks that are in place for a wonderful professional law enforcement organization here in the South. The Chief is right. I've made that transition from hot, sticky Arizona to hot, moist South Carolina. I was with the Tucson Police Department for 33 years, which even I can't believe I'd say 33 years in law enforcement. But I had a wonderful career with the Tucson Police Department at executive level, chief of staff. I ran HR, I ran our professional standards division. I was a precinct commander at several different locations, to include our entertainment district downtown. And I found that I enjoyed being a change agent for that organization. I hope to bring that same skill set here to assist the chief as we look at more progressive, modern, professionally based policing fundamentals within the Charleston Police Department. It's been a whirlwind. I started on April 6th, just like Wendy did, and right away, thrown into an alternate work schedule because of COVID. But I'm getting to know the folks here and what opportunities and challenges exist, and I'm excited about hitting the ground running as well. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you for those introductions. Welcome to Charleston. We look forward to working with you and finding out some of the improvements that you already have planned, as well as others that you're thinking of.
Thank you.
Chief, you and Wendy are going to give us the racial bias audit recommendations, and then leave some time for us to ask questions.
Please, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So Bethany, are you able to get my phone up there?
You should be able to screen share. It'll be hard for me to do it from my laptop.
Let me.
Ms. Stiver, can you press share screen and see if that will, and see if you're able to share your screen? There you go.
Got it?
Yep.
Yes.
That's the first time I've ever pulled that off.
Good job.
I've tried a couple of times. Yeah, it's the technology. All right. So basically, this is just a quick update. on where we're at with the racial bias audit and the strategic plan. So the background here is the audit, for anybody who's not aware of it. The audit final report was published on November 7th in 2019. And after the audit report was published, CPD approved the 2 new positions, myself and Mike Galuli. And as we said, we started on April 6th. So there's just a little bit of my bio and background and qualifications to work on this project. After the events in Ferguson about 5 years ago, I became interested in diving further into some of the issues that we're talking about now in race and policing and, maybe how to prevent tragic outcomes in policing. As Chief mentioned, I've worked quite a bit with the National Institute of Justice. What led me there was actually a research partnership with some epidemiologists at Wright State University to investigate the intersection of infant mortality, exposure to police, and social determinants of health like race. And I'd be happy to talk more about that if anybody's interested. So back to the audit. So what we have in the audit is 48 recommendations that are divided into 72 specific tasks. And I've got a breakdown there. There's 5 different basic categories that CNA identified to look into: traffic stops, field contacts, complaints, oriented policing practices, and recruitment and hiring. And you can see there's roughly the same number of tasks in each section. Where we're at right now, I just did a 6-month update on this, is we've completed 29 of those tasks, which is 40% of the overall audit recommendation. And I also took a look at, what we need to continue making progress, and found that 14 of those tasks require that we increase our capacity to do analysis. And I'll get into that a little bit more. 7% of them require that we increase our capacity to do community engagement. And 13% of those tasks were impacted by the pandemic. And so the conditions that we're living in make it, especially the community engagement work, it makes it more difficult to gather together in groups and do the kinds of community policing we're accustomed to doing. And so here's a breakdown by category. And as you can see, we've made a lot of progress there with the complaint section. We're at 91%. And then at community-oriented policing, we're at 20%. And a lot of that is because, the audit recommended that we need to do more with community policing, but that's a really difficult thing to measure. When we talk about, actually determining what the impact of that community policing effort is on the community. And so we're not going to declare any of those done until we just have a better system in place to do that measurement. And it's going to take some creativity and some work. So on the analysis part, we've got basically 3 key requirements to do better analysis. First is data infrastructure. And so what we have in policing, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this in your field of expertise, if you don't work in government, is that we tend to have a lot of data that sits in different systems. Some of those systems are proprietary and they don't talk to each other very easily. So what we've done, and we're nearing completion on it, was we've created a data lake, which is a centralized repository to store all of that data so we can get at it easier, we can do that analysis, and we can manage it a little bit better. Part 2 is subject matter and analytical expertise, and we're seeking to contract with independent research and research institutions to do some of that high-level analysis that we need in order to answer, questions about disparity and bias in some of our outcomes. And then the additional metrics to connect our outcomes to policies, trainings, and effort. And so this is a big one. Some of the things we do are easy to measure. So if we want to reduce the number of traffic crashes that our officers experience while they're, driving police cars around in their day-to-day operations, we can deliver a training class on driving, and then we can measure the outcome through reductions in crashes. But some of these things are a little bit more difficult to measure. And so things like cultural diversity and implicit bias, we can deliver that training, but it's going to be a little bit more challenging to figure out, how do we measure the outcome? How do we know that that training is actually working to do what it's supposed to do? And so, we'll make progress at different rates on some of these issues, depending on the nature of the thing we're trying to measure. On community engagement, just a few things to point out here, is that, policing in the last 5 years recognized that social distance was a problem. And more distance between communities and police led to distrust between the police and the communities. And by that, I mean, our inability to get out of our cars and actually communicate with people in non-enforcement situations. And so we've really worked hard in the last 5 years to close that social distance and create more opportunities for the police to have good, positive interactions with the community. But now we're living in a world where we have to social distance. We can't get together in person and at things like coffee with a cop. And so our community outreach teams, under the leadership of Captain Thompson, have been very creative in their efforts to overcome this. And they've done all kinds of neat things to figure out how to get out there and do that engagement through video or just physical distance in a safe way. But it looks like we're going to be doing this for a little bit longer, maybe a year, maybe longer. And so we're also working on looking at better tools to interact with and get feedback from the community. And I'm specifically looking at tools used by companies like the Ford Motor Company. There are a lot of businesses out there that have been working for a long time to improve the trust and loyalty with their customers and to get better feedback, not just from their customers, but from their employees, to inspire innovation. And so hopefully we'll have some things in place to give Captain Thompson some better tools to do that outreach. And so then the pandemic impact on the audit progress. Folks in the community have been refocused on taking care of their families and homeschooling. Our calls and crimes have declined slightly since all of this started. And our police department has had to make a lot of adjustments in staffing, training, doing remote training, acquiring PPE for our officers, and meeting the community's needs. And so Chief will tell you we never stopped working through the whole pandemic, and that's absolutely correct. But it has posed some challenges in making progress on the audit. So we're working through it, and it's definitely giving us opportunities to look at the way we do things and improve those. So one of the things that concerns me from the research and analytical perspective is that we don't know when, some of our data sets will start returning to normal or pre-pandemic levels, or if they will. There may be some things that change permanently. And so we may have to adjust the way we collect and look at data, particularly when it comes to calls for service. So part of this is to take the audit. The audit gave us some good specific recommendations, but we also wanted to basically create a roadmap for the next 5 years. And we worked with the College of Charleston to put together a strategic leadership plan. And this was done collaboratively with every leader in every division in the department. And many of the recommendations and objectives from the racial bias audit and the Illumination Project are rolled into the strategic plan. And so we're just at a stage where we're pushing this out internally, and we're being very careful and thoughtful about how we communicate this plan to our officers and our supervisors, because we didn't just want to send this out in an email and expect people to read it and believe in it. And so we've made some videos and we've created some infographics we're working on to communicate to our officers that we're all committed to this plan, and we expect their commitment as well. So that's it. And if you have any questions, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Wendy, for the time that you took to prepare that presentation for us. We do have a number of questions to ask. Before I ask mine, I'll go around the horn first to see. Frank, do you have any questions?
Are you speaking to me?
Yes, Frank
Walsh?
Walsh, do you? Uh-huh.
Not at the moment, I'm listening, trying to absorb
Okay,
this.
fair. All right. Ryan, do you have any questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Mary Alice Mack, do you have any questions?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay. Paul Tamburino, do you have any questions?
No, ma'am, not yet.
Okay. George Palmer, any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. Ann?
No, not now, thanks.
Okay. Melvin, do you have any questions? I think Melvin might be on mute. I keep seeing him connected. Melvin, do you have any questions? Camden? Cam?
Ma'am, I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Bob? Bob, I think, Bob Haley, I think he's on, might be on mute. Oh, you know what? Bob doesn't have his mic on. Here's some questions that he sent to me. Why are the two hires, the two positions that are just filled with Wendy and Michael? It's noted that both are former police officers and both are white. Were there any people of color that applied for the positions? And any current police officers?
There was some diversity in the selection of Wendy, and she was by far the most qualified candidate. And I'm not sure I don't know if you can, with the process with Mike.
Initially, we received our resumes. We didn't look at male, female, sex, or anything like that. So I can't tell that, but I can tell you that there were males and females at the end that did apply. We had to narrow down, but I don't know the race of them.
Okay. The real concern is the fact that, like the comments that we've received and during the racial bias audit, as well as discussions that we've had in previous meetings, the diversification of the police department to bring about hopefully a better understanding of people from various backgrounds. So I believe that's where that question was going. Still wanting to make sure that there is focus and attention being given to diversifying the police department to improve relations among the community. Another question is the pandemic, I know the pandemic was referenced in your presentation, Wendy. Is it impacting, you feel, in a negative way to the police department or the current police and citizen issue that we have, the trust?
I made this observation at the beginning, is that we've done so much work to do community outreach through interpersonal interactions, and I think that's important because I've spent a lot of years going to community events and listening sessions, and it seems like every time we have conversations with the community, one of the things we hear most commonly is that we want to see the police when things when there's not a problem. We want to see the police when they're not there to enforce things or because something bad has happened. And so those events create opportunities for people to build those relationships so that when a police officer does show up at your house because something unpleasant has happened, there's a better chance that it's a familiar face and it's somebody you've met before. And that's a contributing factor, not only to, trusting the police, but just general resiliency in communities. And I've done a lot of work to study resiliency. And I've talked to a lot of professors who specialize this, and probably one of the most useful pieces of information a professor gave me on the subject of resiliency in communities is what really matters is how well do you know your barista? How well do you know your mailman? How well do you know the people who live and work in your community, so that when you move around your world and your day-to-day interactions, you're truly living in a place of neighbors, of friends, of people who know and trust each other, and not strangers. And I think that's one of the most important things we can do. And under the circumstances with the pandemic, yes, we're having a lot less contact with each other. And when we do have contact with each other, our faces are covered, right? And so it's going to be challenging, and we have to work harder to figure out other ways to interact with each other in digital spaces, to continue building those relationships. And so I like what our community engagement team is doing. They've done some really fantastic stuff, and hopefully we can give them more tools to keep doing more.
Is it possible? I know our agenda tonight is pretty full, but it may be down at number 4 under updates, department's response to death of George Floyd and protest. Will some of that come out? Some of the community things that are going on?
I would defer to Chief and Captain Thompson on that. Captain Thompson knows a lot more about all of our all of our efforts out in the community than I do.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see if, and I'm going to cut, Bob, I see your next question too. We want to make sure that we're trying to get to the crux of the matter, which is the relationship between the police department and the citizens. And of course, that concern has heightened because of recent activities that have gone on all over the United States, as well as what we know of that's happened in prior times here in Charleston itself. So when we get further down onto the agenda, we will probably have a little more in-depth discussion.
Absolutely.
That will draw us back to that same concern, that same question. Doris, thank you, Wendy. Doris, did you have any questions?
Just a question regarding, well, more so of a comment regarding community outreach. And I know that's a common phrase or term or activity that the police department want to engage in. One of the things I was looking at on the website regarding internships, and I think that internships are a wonderful opportunity to, to bring diversity into the police department. And you might have to look at it a little differently than they have before. From what I've read, it's like, they've had students from Clemson, the College of Charleston, and the Citadel to come in, but reaching out to, our HBCUs and inviting students, to come in and be a part of an internship program, and maybe even offer a monetary incentive, because many of those students just can't volunteer their time to be an intern. They need to be compensated for it. So that would be an excellent opportunity to, build an interest in the police department for young people to get to know, what goes on regarding being a police officer, just not observing what's going on, but actually having a hands-on and going back and sharing that information with their peers. So instead of going out in the community, maybe bringing folks into the police department.
Doris, this is Captain Thompson. I will tell you that members of my recruiting team are here, and I will tell you that we reach out to those HBCUs for recruiting purposes and for interns, and they can speak later on, the progress of that. But that is an idea that's come up in the past, and we are active in that realm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good to know.
Sydney isn't with us. Max?
Yes,
do you have any
ma'am.
questions?
I just have one. I read the audit, and I I heard Wendy state that it was 40% of the way completed as far as tasks, the 72 tasks. Could she elaborate a little bit more on what she means by those tasks are completed? Could she maybe talk about what some of them were, how they were completed? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I can give an example or a couple of examples. So 2.1 recommends that CPD should establish a strategic plan for the traffic unit. So that plan has been created under Captain Thompson's leadership. And then another example would be the recommendations in 13.2 and 14.1, which are the requirement that supervisors review body-worn camera video footage for all use of force incidents, and then also the establishment of a formal compliance and auditing process to ensure that officers comply with the BWC policy. And so both of those measures were included in a body camera policy that was revised on April 17th of 2020. And so there's a requirement in that policy for supervisors not only to review that video when they investigate a use of force incident, but they also have an auditing process. And so they're randomly selecting and viewing body camera video to make sure that our officers are in compliance with all of our policies. And then, you know, another recommendation, item 17, suggested that the retention period for our body-worn camera video was not long enough. And the policy extended the retention period for body-worn camera video to 400 days, which is more than twice the length of time that the ACLU recommends to keep body camera video. And that's so that if a citizen comes and makes a complaint about an incident that happens, there's a greater likelihood that that video will still exist in the system for a longer period of time. And so that gives us greater accountability and transparency. That's been done. And not only did we increase the retention period dramatically, we went twice what the ACLU was recommending. So those are just some of the examples. The spreadsheet with all of our progress notes has been updated and will be released on the website.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerome Harris, do you have any questions? And welcome to the committee.
Thank you very much. Comment on community engagement and its interface with the strategic plan. From looking at the slide, it sounded like the strategic plan was developed with an internal look, conversations internally. What community engagement was there in terms of reviewing, commenting on the strategic plan?
You want to talk a little bit about just for the College of Charleston?
So we partnered with the College of Charleston, and the idea is to help us look at what we're doing, and not just so we had an internal look, but an external look. Before we develop the plan, we want to bring the community all together and hit different parts of the city, have them review the plan with us to actually get it before it got published. However, with the pandemic, this was back in March, where it really just pretty much shut down the businesses and everything. We were unable to do that. So we were at a crossroads of, do we publish the plan or do we wait until the pandemic is over with? And if we wait till the pandemic is over with, it's a 5-year plan, how long will that be? And when you look at what the CDC was recommending and what the governor's orders were for meeting and the guidelines of how many can meet together and how you can do that in a productive manner, we thought it was best to move forward with the plan, and that, you know, even though it is published, if there are any comments, we'd be happy to add to that, because it's a living document. It is going to change in there. It's like our policy manual. You know, we saw our BWC policy, we thought it was good. However, if we find something else that needs to be changed in it, then we'll always add to it. So we wanted to have the community there, but with the pandemic and it being shut down, we just couldn't get it done. We didn't want to wait any longer on the strategic leadership plan, as our old one expired December 31st of 2019.
So I think, and perhaps if you had a fully developed advisory committee, you might have tried to involve the advisory committee in that process or consulted with them regarding, I know that there are a number of organizations who would have been able to look at the document and make comment. And I think I'm concerned from what I'm hearing that community engagement, your metric, right, is how many times have we talk to folks in the neighborhood, all right? I don't hear, maybe in other locations where folks have been changing policies, right, use of force, storage, and things of that nature, they at least provide an opportunity for some group of people, right? And it never is enough, right? Because somebody's always going to criticize because you didn't ask me, I didn't know. But some group of folks to be involved in review of the policy and policies, and the assumption about who is content area experts. I think in this moment right now, in the Me Too, Black Lives Matter, all right, the definition who might be a content expert needs to be examined and challenged, and to see if we're comfortable with that as we move through. So just if I look at what we say we want to do in terms of community engagement, one of the major documents driving that is a strategic plan, and the community hasn't had a role in it, okay? And if we want to show a different relationship, we should, how we start is how we finish. All right, so I'm just an observation.
Yeah, and I just want to acknowledge that I agree with what you just said. I appreciate what you just said. And I think that as we move forward, what I would describe this process is going from listening sessions to work sessions. And so we're listening and working now, and we have to get that input in order to have a good product. So you're right. I couldn't agree more. We have to engage more as we continue to kind of, I describe this audit, if we do it right, as we become a learning organization. You've heard me say this before. I really believe that. And that is that we're constantly seeking input. We're constantly seeking feedback, and we're constantly, it's an iterative process. And so we got to start somewhere. And I think we got to keep moving the ball. We've kind of said that we needed to do that. We've committed to that. We are doing that, but we can't do it independent of the communities that we serve that are affected by everything that we do. So we have to get input. This is going to have to change based on that. And as we identify one of these many areas, I don't think there's anything more important than community engagement, right? We talked about building trust. How do we do that? It's easier said than done. And so the communities that have the least amount of trust for us, and specifically the African-American communities, we have a lot of work to do. Now, based on what happened in Minneapolis, based on what happened in Georgia, based on what's happening around our country, based on a lot of different things with our history, right here locally and regionally and nationally, we've got to engage in that difficult conversation. So if we think we know how to do it, that's a great start, but that's not where we end. We have to listen to the people that we're serving. And so the fact that we have an almost full committee, just the CPAC alone is a huge step in the right direction. People like yourself and everybody else in this room and on this call being willing to engage in this is a big step in the right direction. So I appreciate and value and agree with your comments.
So just a recommend, something for Madam Chair, is whether or not a policy and procedure review subcommittee,
yes,
okay, of this body, right, becomes useful for you.
Yes.
In that regard, just as an example of how we think about what this committee does, because I know, having listened to the conversation during the audit, as it evolved, it was unclear about what relationship the CPAC had to the audit, what responsibility and accountability back, and we should try and be clear if we could be helpful in helping you accomplish your work and our role, that we make that happen.
Yes, sir. And I appreciate you saying it because I think
So
that's
now,
a natural
Chief.
progression
Chief, based on that, and I know you've mentioned a few times during tonight's meeting about work groups. Could that be a work group that's established immediately, Policy and Procedure Review Subcommittee?
It's your committee. It's not for me to tell you what or how to do.
No,
but
no,
I
no,
would
we're
embrace
talking
that.
about working with the police department though. So would our
Yes,
direct
yes.
contact for those policies and procedure reviews, is our direct contact Wendy then?
Yes, and I do believe having a work group, that would be a great start. It'd be a
Okay.
good step. And I think that's kind of what I've heard from the committee from the beginning that we started is we've talked a lot, but are we actually having a meaningful work product? And are there work groups that are actually kind of diving into some of these specifics?
Exactly. So council members, if you would please email to me by next Friday. So that's Friday a week. If you'd be interested in serving on the Policy Procedure Review Subcommittee. And then I can get those names to Bethany. Okay?
And that's actually one of the
Oh, can't hear you too well.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
Yes, it is.
That's actually one of the audit recommendations is that CPAC serve in the role of providing community feedback to the police department on policies. And I'll send you, I put together kind of a rough outline so we can establish a timeline to do that. And I'll send that to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, actually, if you send it to Bethany, then Bethany, would you send it out to the entire council? That way we all can receive it. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Jerome Harris. Chris Russo, are you still with us? Are you on? Did you have any questions? Okay, Doris, did you have another question? Doris Grant? Okay,
I'm
I
sorry.
had one.
No, I don't right now.
Okay, thank you. After I've listened to all the other questions, I do have one question dealing with the audit. I didn't hear much discussion, in-depth discussion about cultural diversity, awareness, and education with the police officers. Is that going to be captured under one of the other items that we're talking about?
Yes, ma'am.
It is? Okay. Then I'll reserve my question. I'll come back to it later.
And in addition to that, several of the audit items address training on implicit bias and cultural engagement and some other issues. And so I'll be working with Captain Cretella to, look at what's out there in terms of those options to kind of keep that in the forefront of our training plan every year.
I'm really looking for what's happening as some short-term goals.
Yes.
Capturing low-hanging fruit so that we could see, are there any assessments that are done of the officers to determine if that's the right fit for the officer, be in that position? Those along that line.
Absolutely. And that'll be part of the training plan. There is some training scheduled, I believe, coming up next month. But I've been taking cultural diversity and implicit bias classes for many years. And, not all training, not all training is necessarily going to make a difference in how we do business. So, back to that, making sure that that our outcomes are actually delivering on our promises. We're looking at training that may be able to demonstrate that. So we want some evidence that it's going to work to achieve the goals that it's promising.
Okay.
We do have some stuff coming.
Okay, thank you. And as we move to the department's response to COVID, as well as the department's response to the death of George Floyd and the protest, Captain Thompson, would you please note that we were hopeful that these meetings would, since we started by having one meeting at Burke School, I understand about the COVID situation that we're currently in, but if you would look to see if there's an opportunity for us to socially distance and meet somewhere in the community as well. And I know that's gonna probably be a bit challenging with the current guidelines that we have. But Captain Thompson, if you could consider that and let us know on the council
Yes, ma'am.
any success that you'll have in finding other locations that put us out in the community.
Yes, ma'am. And that's one of the things we talked about the last meeting before COVID hit, that we would branch out to Johns Island and some other areas so that would make it easier for people to attend, but absolutely.
Thank you. Chief, you have the next two items, and I do know that we're at 6:35. So we have about another hour to go. So I'm sure we want to make sure that we get to all of the items. So Chief, if you'd let us have updates on department's response to COVID-19 as well as to the death of Mr. George Floyd and the protest.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
I want to acknowledge the one comment that was made about internships. I'm a huge believer in that, and we have been doing that. And I just want to note that I was hired as an intern. I was actually a paid intern when I started right out of college, and I've been without any break in service ever since in 1988. And I think internships are a great way of getting people diversity and a whole variety of other things. So I just wanted to thanks for that comment. So the COVID, everybody's aware of the tremendous impact that's had on our city. It's crushing the business community. It's had a huge impact on so many different things, but I'll stick with the police department. We immediately did research and have been in contact with other agencies that got hit a lot worse than South Carolina. I have counterparts in New York City. I have counterparts out west. And so I was able to learn from many of those people about the seriousness of the COVID, about the steps that could be taken to protect our officers and stay in service, if you will. New York City, as I'm sure you're aware, really just got crushed by the COVID. They had a lot of deaths on their police department. They had huge numbers of people that were out because of the COVID illness, because of quarantine, isolation, at a time when the city was really getting hit hard. So we had a lot of conference calls. We learned from them. I think very early on, we developed a protocol within our police department with sanitation, with the wearing of masks, with how we respond to calls for service, handling calls remotely, limiting our public contact, and taking calls over the telephone. And there's a whole lot of different ways that we staff. We were able to do teleworking from some positions. We were able to do A/B shifts where some people, if somebody got the virus, they wouldn't infect everybody else. So they worked opposite hours and opposite days. There's a lot of things that we did. I will tell you, and I was just looking at our numbers, we had 3 cases over several months of positive COVID. In the last week to 10 days, we've had an additional 11 positive cases. So we have a total of 14 in our police department, people, mostly sworn officers, a couple of civilian employees. And we have a central point of contact in our department, a lieutenant who works closely with MUSC and the HR for the city, and our safety and wellness officer. So if somebody's not sure and they have a question, they can go to that person and they can have total confidentiality, and they get quick testing. Public safety has been given the priority, and they get quick results. And there's a lot of contact tracing and investigation that goes into when somebody tests positive. I believe that we've done well, but I'll tell you in the last week or two, and I'll attribute it to a variety of things with the riots, the protests, and a variety of other very close contacts. And I think a lot of our young people who really don't have a lot of concern about the illness are probably becoming a little bit more lax maybe in their private lives. And as a result, I think that's part of why we had a spike. The restaurant and food and beverage industries also had a spike. So we're watching it very closely. We have, Wendy mentioned this, I like to say it, the police have never slowed down. While the businesses have closed, while many of the government entities have closed or teleworking, we have never closed. Our men and women actually have not been on vacation. They haven't, and many of them have not been taking leave because obviously anywhere they would go, most places are closed or there's limitations on what they could do, and we need them. So our schools, because they were closed, and other entities actually gave us additional resources during this period, which has helped us to be out and being able to do a lot of other things because of the high tempo. But it's interesting time for us in that some people have family members that are compromised with their health. Some of our employees have compromised conditions. So we've done a lot to accommodate them and have alternative work assignments so they're not on the front lines. They're not unnecessarily exposed. They're not in a position where they're going to create harm to their own families. It's taken a lot of work. I feel like we've done a decent job. One of my my philosophies is the opposite of fear is good communication and good knowledge and good information. So we constantly talk, and I'll do conference calls with families. Every couple of weeks, we'll talk to families, and we've done videos, and we've done updates so that people feel comfortable to ask questions, to get the right information. We've done a lot to get everybody the right PPE, the right equipment. We do temperature checks. We've been doing that since the very beginning. And a lot of these cases were identified early on without any spread because people followed the protocol. They did the temperature check. Maybe they were hot at home, so they didn't come into work. They went and got tested. And if they had a positive test, they stayed home. So we were able to limit any kind of exposure. And that's probably enough on COVID, unless anybody's got additional questions. It's been difficult doing so many meetings by Zoom. I'm a people person. Our community meetings, a lot of them canceled. We canceled the bridge run. We canceled Spoleto. We've canceled the River Dogs is probably going to get their season canceled. There's so many different things that we do in this city, and all those things have been canceled. That's been very difficult, and I think the long-term effect of that is not good for our economy. It's not good for, among other things, I think it was mentioned, community relationships, and at a time when we're going through all this, it's an added layer of challenge, to say the least.
Well, Chief, I do want to interject before you move to the next item. The fact that we do appreciate Captain Thompson working with Steve and Bethany and Jennifer to get it arranged so that we could have this meeting tonight by Zoom, as well as open opportunity for community to participate. I understand that the actual participation by other community members who are not actually members of the council is a bit challenged for tonight. And hopefully we'll be able to work towards getting that improved to allow more community participation during the next meeting, if we're still in this type of social distancing environment that we're currently in. So I do want to thank you all for that. I know that was a mammoth task to do within the last, month, I think it was, Captain Thompson?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so thank you for that.
I was just going to say, I'll just remind everybody on the call that, if they do wish to speak at these meetings, that they can submit their questions, by 12 p.m. the day of, in this format, if we still go with the same format, and we'll give them the opportunity to speak as we did Emily when we first started.
Okay, thank you. Chief, the response to the death of George Floyd and the protest. And then there were, Emily mentioned when she was speaking to us about the concerns of how the protests were handled by police officers. Would you talk a little bit about that as well?
Sure.
Thank you.
So I'm going to say a few things about what happened in Minneapolis. before the protests, before the riots, before any of those things began here, I made a statement, very public, very declarative statement about my disdain for what happened in Minneapolis. I feel like I was very clear about that we would never tolerate such behavior here. And again, this was before there was a lot of attention, before there was a protest or riot or any of the things that occurred here. We, even in my 30-year career, plus 30 years, even 30 years ago, when we didn't have the policies, we didn't have the training, we didn't have the equipment, we didn't have all the things that we have today. We have come a long ways, we have a long ways to go. I would never tolerate what occurred in Minneapolis with Mr. Floyd's death. He was murdered, as far as I'm concerned, from what I could see. He was a minor crime. He was handcuffed, he was face down, he wasn't resisting. He is an officer, a white officer with a uniform, not too different than the one I'm wearing right now, put his knee on his neck, and he had it on his neck for almost 9 minutes. And ultimately, I think what we now know is that caused his death. And so I cannot say I've ever seen anything that bad in my lifetime. I've seen a lot of bad things. I've never seen anything that bad. And now our entire nation and our entire world has seen, at the hands of a white officer, a young African-American man, Mr. George Floyd, killed by a police officer, unnecessarily, criminally, violently, and inappropriately. And I have great disdain for that. It was deplorable what happened. And I can't begin to describe to you how much I disagree with that event. And I talked about other events. The Arbery killing in Georgia, and it taken months to get an investigation that actually led to charges against the people that killed him. And there was a lot of things that occurred in a fairly short period of time. So needless to say, and again, I said this before the protest started, I said, this is going to set us back in law enforcement. And it has, in a very profound, big way. What happened in Minneapolis is going to affect us here for years to come. It's affected our city. It's affected our profession. It's affected our relationship with our communities. And there's a very loud and clear voice that I've heard in the Black Lives Matter movement is, and I'll just paraphrase, we want to be heard. We want leadership to listen to us. We want your attention. And what I've said to my friends, the people that I've talked to, that I respect in the BLM movement, is you have our attention. We are listening. And I will tell you, I believe over the last 2 years and moving forward with this audit, that we are focused on reform. We are focused on justice and accountability. We are focused on transparency and change. I believe in that. I'm motivated in that way. I'm passionate about it. That's what this movement, I think, if you listen, and I've been trying to listen, is all about. And anybody who doesn't raise their hand and stand up against things like this, there's something wrong with them. We have to stand up. And we have to be productive. And at some point, I hope that we can unite and that we can focus on the change that is needed and that we can accomplish something really meaningful out of all of this. I'll talk briefly about the riot on the 30th, and then on the Sunday, the next day, the arrests that have been talked about. And I'm not going to get into great detail. We can talk about this for hours. I think one of the comments talked about releasing the additional audio that exists that was FOIA'd. You may or may not have heard, there was 911 tapes that were released, and there's another audio of the actual operations of the police that night, and that will be released in the next day or so. So you'll get to hear that. And for whoever was asking for that, that is going to be released. There was a FOIA that was done, and as a result of that FOIA, those recordings will be released. There's a public safety committee hearing tomorrow at 4:30. And some of this will be discussed in that hearing, and those tapes will be released probably at the end of the day tomorrow.
And Chief, while
Now-
you're talking about the releasing of the tapes, would you just insert a statement regarding the reason why the tapes haven't been released yet?
Sure. Whenever there's a FOIA, there's several things. Number one, the operational tempo of our agency right now is more than I've ever had in my entire career. Between riots, protests, the COVID, and a whole variety of other things, every single day, we're doing our best to protect this city and secure our city and keep it safe. And that is no small job, I promise you. There's a whole lot of things going on, and there's a lot of things that we need to be paying attention to. And so I say that in the context of these recordings, because when you release a recording, it has to be reviewed to make sure that you're not releasing information that is private, that's confidential. And if there is things in there, it could be our undercover officers, it could be operational tactics, it could be specific names and information about people. That has to be reviewed. And that takes a long time to review that. And in some cases, there has to be redaction and other things that occur. We've had so many things going on that we have not had time to do all of that. At this point, we're ready to do a release, and that'll occur. And there's nothing that we have to hide. There's nothing in any of this that is particularly revealing. And this information will go out, but it takes time to do those reviews. So to the riot on the Saturday night, or the night of the 30th, there was a very violent riot that occurred following what I'll describe as a mostly peaceful protest. There was a protest that began on Saturday at 2 o'clock at Marion Square, at Calhoun and King Street, and it grew in size. We did not have any intelligence or any information that indicated that we would have a crowd anywhere near the size that ended up showing up. It's been described as many as a couple thousand people, and they marched for several hours, and ultimately that crowd dispersed. Most of that crowd dispersed, and there was a rainstorm, and there was a kind of a violent thunderstorm and lightning, and many of the people that were in that crowd left and went home. There was other people who arrived and joined another group after dark, and ultimately it was a very difficult night in Charleston. There was people who were injured, there was police officers that were assaulted, there were officers that were hit with bricks and bottles and a whole variety of other objects, including skateboards and different things. There were business owners who, frankly, I'm not sure if they'll ever be able to open up again because they were devastated. They were assaulted. Their businesses, not only were their glass in their shops broken, there was people that were carrying guns in this crowd. They were assaulted. They started fires, and they burned a police vehicle. They smashed out windows, and they did all kinds of things, which we don't even have time to get into tonight. That lasted until the early morning hours the next morning, and we were able to thankfully put out all the fires. And in the end, there was not serious injuries or deaths that occurred. The very next day, there was additional protests. They were not all peaceful. There were people in those protests that were throwing bottles and other objects and assaulting people. There were warnings. We did close Marion Square at one point, and there were approximately 40 people that were arrested in that process. Nobody was brutalized. I think that was one of the comments that came out tonight and as a segue into this meeting. I'm not aware that anybody was brutalized. If somebody's aware of that, I'd like to know about it, and we'll investigate any and all complaints to that effect. So there was another long day on Sunday, and I can tell you it hasn't ended. It's been over a month now. We're almost into July. That was May 30th. And I got to tell you, it is a very high-paced tempo because each time there's a protest, each time there's an event, it's something that we have to adequately staff. Among those that we brought into the city to try to protect the city It's been all of our partnering agencies, Baltimore, the Berkeley County Sheriff's Office, the Charleston County Sheriff's Office, Goose Creek, Mount Pleasant Police Department, North Charleston Police Department, and many others. And I'm sure I'm leaving some out. SLED has been a big part. The National Guard and other entities have been brought in to try to bring calm into the city, into these events, and to keep our city safe. It's been a very difficult time for our city. We have a job to protect peaceful protesters. I'm very passionate about allowing people to voice their opinion, their First Amendment rights by law. They have the right to speak and be heard. And there's a lot of people that have a lot to say and they want to be heard. And it's our job to protect them and to allow them to be heard. But what I've emphasized, it's important that people do that responsibly, do it peacefully, and do it in a way that is within the confines of the law. There are some people, and thankfully it's a much smaller number of people who've chosen to be criminal element. And I will tell you that the last that I checked, I think we had 76 warrants that were issued for those people to include that were in the riots, that committed violent acts and criminal acts to destroy our city. Among those are felony charges for inciting a riot, for arson, and a variety of other things, destruction of property, assault on the police, assault on store owners and merchants. And I will tell you, as a follow-up to that, we've worked with the FBI, with the ATF, we've worked with our partnering agencies, and we've arrested, I think, 23 out of 26 people that we have warrants, and several of those are probably going to get federally charged and go to prison for a significant amount of time. So we have, on the one hand, the responsibility to protect people's rights to speak, to be heard, which frankly, I agree with most of the messaging. I actually agree with the majority of what Black Lives Matter stands for and what they're trying to accomplish. I think that's consistent with what we're trying to do with our audit and a lot of the work that we're trying to accomplish. And then on the other hand, we have an obligation to protect our city from violence, from assaults, from burning the city down. So that's the dichotomy. We're right in the middle of all that, and we have to stand in that gap. And that's probably a good overview, at least, of what's occurred, and there'll be more to come.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions from the council? If you have a question, rather than me do roll call, you can jump in with your question.
Not a question, but a comment. Chief, you mentioned that you kind of related the violence that happened to Black Lives Matter. I'm not sure all of those persons who engaged in criminal activity represented Black Lives Matter. I think a lot of them might have been opportunists, but I think the correlation between Black Lives Matter might not be a fair one.
If I made that analogy, I did not mean to, and I thank you for correcting me. I actually have great respect for people who I have met who are part of the movement. I'll call it the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement. I actually agree with the majority of what they're trying to accomplish and have a cry out for justice, have a cry out for accountability in policing, have a cry out for reform and change and transparency. And so if I said that, I did not mean to. And I'm glad that you corrected me, because I agree with you 100%. There was a separate element. There was a completely separate element. Most of the people who were there for that protest and other protests since then have been amazing people. And matter of fact, I will tell you, most of the people that I visited on King Street, I walked up and down King Street, were a part of the actual protest, many of the people in the shops and the businesses, because they support Black Lives Matter. And they said they were shocked when at some point later in the night, a separate group, I agree with you, began to break their windows and assault them. They were shocked because they were actually out there clapping and basically praising and agreeing with the protesters and a lot of the messaging that was occurring. So I
Thank you,
agree with
Chief.
you. Very separate groups.
Thank you. Chief, have chokeholds and knees to necks, has that been banned now with the Charleston Police Department as a result of what happened in Minneapolis to Mr. Floyd?
No, it was banned a long time ago, way before any of this stuff. And I actually am glad you asked that. There's been a lot of information that has been circulated demanding, I think, in some cases, 8 different tenants, and among those are chokeholds and the knee on the neck and different things. And ironically, what I say to people, we want to go way beyond that. That's very, very, as you said earlier, low-hanging fruit. We've already done the majority of those things, and we're not interested in press releases or photo ops or saying, hey, we banned a chokehold. Look at us. Here's a new policy. We're good to go. You're seeing that in a lot of different places. We'd already done that a long time ago. We're trying to go way beyond that. This audit goes way beyond any of those basic things. Those are important. I'm not trying to minimize the importance of that, but we've gone way beyond those things.
Okay, and along those lines, I know the audit picked up on the fact that there have been traffic stops, just stopping a person about a light is out or the light over the license plate is out. One of the comments that was submitted for tonight addressed that, stating one of the community members, not on the council, but a community resident, stated that they've been stopped a number of times. And I know that came up during the audit. Has anything been done to reevaluate, reassess with the police officers, reasons to stop?
Yeah,
people,
so
to not aggravate, to not provoke a resident?
I'm looking at Jerome because I think each one of these ends up being a work group at some point. But in the interest of time, I'd like to have Dustin, who's the captain over our traffic division, talk just a little bit about some of the things that we've done.
Okay.
Because we're not anywhere near where we need to be, I believe, 2 years ago, a year ago, or today. But we're in a much, much better place today than we were a year ago and 2 years ago. A lot of things have changed. A lot more needs to change. And that's where the data analytics are part of that too. But I'll let Dustin talk a little bit just on the traffic division piece.
All right, thank you, sir.
Just briefly, one thing that we do get is I think it's every other week we get a report from our analysts to show the number of tickets that are written on each traffic stop for each officer. So one of the complaints was, stacking tickets, writing 4 or 5 tickets for the traffic stop. So that's being monitored on an officer by officer basis. Another good idea, the second part of that is that the traffic division, the traffic commander now gets a report from our analyst as well to not just write random tickets at different areas of the city. So all of us that have lived here for 20 or 30 years know the areas that you're going to get a ticket in. Well, that's not reducing collisions. That's not reducing deaths. That's not really reducing DUIs when you get a ticket coming across the Ashley River Bridge, for example. So traffic commander's getting a monthly report for hotspot collision mapping, et cetera. One good idea that came out at the end of last year, and COVID has slowed us down, is one of our we put it out to our officers for good ideas coming forward. So one thing to resolve the traffic light, the brake light's always out on your car, or the tag light's out, or those specific things. He's presented a pilot project that we actually assist that person. If we pull them over for that violation, then we assist that person with getting that correction made. So and that's going to be part of the community outreach. So that's one thing that's positive that's come out of it. But the courts have been closed for 3 months, so that has slowed to a crawl. But we do have a basic plan in place and a presentation ready to give to the courts. But it'll be a diversion plan. And the officer put in his write-up the specific example that the person keeps getting pulled over for the same tag light out over and over and over again and never gets it fixed.
And I'll just add a couple of things. and I think the traffic division is really, you can put that on your list of like areas that I think we really need probably a lot more discussion. But we have a new director of the traffic division, Chrissy McFadden, who was promoted and put into that division, and she's doing a fantastic job. We have a new captain, which is Dustin, which is more connection to community-oriented policing, and he has experience in that. Different perspective when it comes to traffic. And I'll just throw this out. We also have a different, and Wendy touched on this, we have a different footprint when it comes to body-worn cameras and the audit process and the review process. So if you were to complain, for example, one, we're trying to do better with complaints. We want more complaints, so we have more feedback about what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it. And then reviewing that footage and actually being more proactive to make sure that we're doing what we should be doing. And with the new leadership and the new strategic plan for the traffic division, it's a completely different focus. It's not focused on numbers or writing tickets. It's more focused on reducing deaths and reducing collisions and addressing quality of life issues. And there's really quite a difference between those two.
So then, Chief, I'm making some notes here. I know we're in the process of setting up a work group for policy and procedure review. Do we need, it sounds like council, we need to do one on traffic stops. Council members, do you agree?
Can you talk to her about the message, please?
So.
Sir, may I go next? Sure. Thank you. Chief, okay, just to follow up on a comment that you made before, that you don't publicize changes in policies that you've already made because you don't want to highlight that.
Not because we don't want to highlight.
No, but I mean, I understand because you don't, I get that. So perception's reality. So right now, what the disconnect really is, let's put it out there. The disconnect is it's trust, and it's saying, there's a blue wall. We all know, I'm that way within my job. We all have it within our careers. And what I would say is maybe a communication process, like we would have a police blotter, and not identifying names because you can't do that. Those are HR type issues, but almost have a periodic misconduct report so that the public will see, without it being forced onto you, they're seeing the results of your own actions of, hey, we've had 10 complaints, we've had 4, reprimand, whatever it is. I'm just giving a very high level, so that you're communicating it out yourself rather than always a response to a demand for information that people feel like they're pulling it from you, because I think that goes a long way to the trust. So still protecting the officers because they have privacy and they've got a due process. But the same thing that we do to even suspects where, hey, it gets out there, we announce a lot of crimes that happen. The same thing can happen where you're starting to say, I'm proactively going out there and I'm identifying that we're policing our own, and here's an indication of how we're doing that, obviously without giving details.
So 2 things you touched on, which is a best practice, which touches on transparency, accountability, and it contributes towards public trust. And it is a trust in the audit, and we do both of them. I'll let Tony hit on it, and Mike, kind of helping out, is that we post all of our policies, including all of our updates online. And we do post our disciplinary process, and you can kind of touch on that. So you're
I can put policies all day long. I do that for a living. I can put policies. It's more important to understand everybody's got policies. We all have policies. That Minneapolis have policies. Okay. What we're doing is we're saying, okay, here's the results of the actions compared to our policies, to show that we didn't just do a checkbox to say, hey guys, we got a policy. It's showing that not only do we have a policy, but here's the enforcement behind it. We're showing you the results of the enforcement behind it.
Yep.
Because an audit every 2, 3, 4, 5 years is not timely enough to truly capture the in-time trust that needs to be built.
So just real quick, I'm Captain Curtel, Tony Curtel. I'm the captain of our professional standards division, which includes internal affairs and training. And just to touch on our complaints, is majority of our disciplinary action comes from internal rather than external, because we're doing the proactive work, we're doing the body camera reviews, we're finding the problems before it comes external, which we're happy to say that we're doing that. We have our 2019 end of year report that we're gonna be releasing here within the next week or so. We just got held up with COVID and the protests. It should have been done about a month or two ago, but timeliness, we had other priorities. But in that talks about our use of force data, who's using force, what type of force is being used. It also goes into our administrative investigations, kind of a snapshot of how many we have, the external, the internal, and what is the outcome of those investigations, if you will. So that will be on the website, kind of, like I said, in the next week or so. So that should give you a good snapshot of what we're doing internally here to police ourselves. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, because if you do that, remember, what the public looks at is, it's more important how you police yourselves. Because when you look at Minneapolis, probably the biggest outcry, besides the actual action, was the inaction of everybody else around you, how they weren't policing each other. So you win the trust, not because I called and complained about you, because obviously somebody's got to act on that. It's when you all police each other and say, hey, that behavior is wrong. Not only am I telling you as a peer it's wrong, that's our first line. Hey, stop doing that. Stops there. You continue to go, we move it up a chain of command. And it's saying, how is a chain of command being reinforced that this behavior is incorrect, rather than reinforcing blue wall?
And we put out that on the website. I'll have Captain Thompson send an email maybe to your group, just to let you know it is out there so you guys can look at it.
And just since it's timely, and this will knock one thing off the agenda, EPIC training, I'll just touch on very quickly, is ethical policing is courageous. We got it from New Orleans. We started about a year or so ago, and our policy, and again, this is one of the things that everybody's talking about now after the fact. We were already doing this. We have a duty to intervene in our policy. And EPIC training is something that requires, and that was the one thing that got me worse than, almost as bad. I mean, I don't think anything could be worse than what happened. But you're looking around and you're like, why is nobody doing anything? There's officers all over the place. I couldn't stand watching that for 1 second. And you got 4 officers right there. So we have a duty to intervene. We actually go over those scenarios and we say, okay, somebody does something. You can save a life. They could have saved a life, right? They could have saved a life that day. They didn't. You could save somebody's career. They could have done that. They didn't do that. You got people going to federal prison and all kinds of stuff's going to come out of that. You could save the public trust. That's gone. That went out the window. Why? Because nobody did anything. You could take that in so many directions. We don't have time to get all the way into EPIC training, but it's 4-hour block, and we go. It's all scenarios. It's all interactive, just like this. It's all about peer pressure. It involves the entire agency from the top down. I've been in the training, and we talk about, okay, this happens. What are you going to do about it? How do you articulate how you're going to do that? How are you? And you're required to do that. So don't just sit there, and you're going to have to actually engage in this conversation. You're going to have to break up in little groups. How they create that ability to intervene and stop somebody from doing something wrong.
And I always have to, I won't say correct the chief on this, but he always goes to the extreme of the worst of the worst. However, we had an epic moment during the protest to where one officer was in a verbal exchange with another citizen. They were just going back and forth. It's something as simple as that. Another officer saw where it was going, and she basically intervened. So it's not just the most critical, it goes down to something very basic on how you talk to someone and how you should treat them. So it is a full complement of that.
Appreciate it.
And Chief, while we're talking about training, so we can catch 2 more of the items that are on the agenda, and I think that'll finish us out maybe. The cultural diversity training for officers, and then diversity in the command staff. Would you and Captain Cretella be able to discuss that now too?
Yeah,
Lieutenant
Dustin,
Adams?
you want to take some of that, or you? Yep.
So we're about to talk about cultural diversity within our training. So we have 3 big topics that we're going to go over. We're going to do a snapshot of it. I think it's not fair just to talk about it to you. We're going to find a platform to see if you can either sit or watch and host these classes and do it remotely, just to see what we talk about. You know, it's nothing that we're hiding. There's nothing sensitive that we talk about, or tactics or anything internally that we can't release. But it's something that we would like you guys to be a part of, and maybe start doing this more for the public to host these classes. Just get everyone involved. The first one is our fair and impartial policing class. And we started this back in 2012, give or take. Our department has gone through this training, as well as our new recruits in our police corps that also go through it. And this class focuses basically on implicit bias rather than the explicit bias, hoping that if you have any internal biases, that yes, you recognize that they can be changed, and we're hoping to see that change. And the big part of this class is not just relating to the officers, but it's the citizens as well. What biases do you have? And you talk about the blue wall. That's a perception. Does it exist? To some extent in different communities. So he said every job does have it. That's one of the things we talk about. The next one is our civil rights presentation. So currently, every department, every officer on the department that is cut loose for independent duty has gone through that training. There's only 2 police corps classes that haven't gone through that training, and that was due to some COVID restrictions. But once COVID has been lifted and the presenters feel comfortable coming into us and presenting, we're going to do that. And that training is, I've talked about Charleston and the civil rights movement upon our community, as well as the police department. And also is designed to talk about how it impacts policing in this area. It's initial to where we are in modern day practices. So how do we get to where we are? This is a great class. When it was first brought to us, we didn't know what to expect, but it gives a good historical data because a lot of the members within the Charleston Police Department are not from Charleston. I'm from Youngstown, Ohio. Justin's a local, but Mike's from a different area. DC Broughton is local, but Miss Malloy is not, and neither is Chief. So it's really understanding our community, and that's a good class. And once we start those up, we'd like you guys to sit on those as well to kind of bring you in. And the last one is a new one that we started with. It's our partnership with the FBI, and it's multiculturalism for law enforcement. And it just talks about all the different cultures here that we have in America and their different perceptions, our perceptions of them. We've also done training with the LGBTQ community and with AFA. And we realized that within that community, we had some issues of the African American community, the communities that really need us. They don't trust us because how are they treated in the past? Yeah. Like I said, that's just a quick snapshot of everything we're doing here. But once we have some COVID restrictions and our training is back on course, we'll definitely open that up. If you guys want to participate, we'll encourage it. We'll encourage your feedback. And you can actually be there with the officers going through this training just to see their perception or how are they taking it. And you might be able to learn something, or we'll be able to learn something from you out.
Thank you. I believe let me jump in here. I believe we have 2 council members who have questions. Max, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just have one for the chief regarding Sunday, May 31st, the protest in Marion Square that day. You mentioned earlier that you want to engage in conversation with citizens and that you want to protect them and allow them to be heard. There's an arrest that was made that day that got some national attention of G. Jordan, who's 23 years old. He was detained and arrested in Marion Square on that day, and I just kind of wanted maybe an explanation as far as to what his charges were and why he was arrested that day.
Yeah, so a couple things. One, there was more to that than what people saw on social media, right? There's a social media version of a lot of things, and people see, oh, wow. And by the way, I had lunch with G. Jordan and reached out to him, and I extremely bright young man who I hope that we can work with and is a part of the Black Lives Matter movement and is extremely committed to meaningful change, has great questions about what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and really wants to help create a better city and create more equity and just better outcomes, I'll just say. So amazing young man, along with some other men that I've met during the last month who are advocating for change. In terms of the actual Marion Square that day and what people saw, they didn't see that there was people throwing bottles and that we had officers get hit in the head with bottles and other things that were contemporaneous right around that same time frame. They didn't see that we had warned people that they had to leave the park, which is something that is really important for us to do at times. We learned that if we could have gotten ahead of what happened Saturday night, maybe we wouldn't have had as bad of an outcome, right? So we learned from that. We had a different posture. We were a little more assertive. We were getting ahead of some of the things before they got bad on Sunday. The analogy I give just very generally is, even something as simple as you could go to the McDonald's tomorrow, and we have people that are protesting the minimum wage, right? A living wage. People are very passionate about that. And you could go to the McDonald's and we can say, okay, you can't stand on the sidewalk and impede pedestrian or vehicular traffic. If you do, you're going to be arrested. You might be, and you are one of the nicest guys I know, but you're still getting arrested. You could be my son, you could be my daughter, and they could put you up on YouTube or whatever, and but at the end of the day, we have a job. We made a decision. We issued warnings. We did not brutalize anybody. We didn't rough anybody up, but we made some arrests. And that's.
So their charges were what, like obstruction? I mean, what kind of charges?
There actually different people that got different charges. So I could get that to you if you email me. I can get you all the charges.
Thank you, Chief. Jerome Harris, you had a question too, did you?
Yeah, an observation and perhaps a question. Comment really quickly on the impact of the virus and the demonstrations on the morale and the wear and tear on the force. We talk community, but the officers also they're part of the community, and just curious in terms of what's going on and what might need to be done to support them.
Number one, thank you for your question. It's never been a more difficult time in policing that I'm aware of. I've talked to cops that are completely emotionally broken. I've talked to people great leaders who no longer cops anymore, and chiefs that are no longer chiefs, sheriffs that are no longer sheriffs. People I personally know around the country. I talked to my mentor yesterday morning for about an hour. He was a major city chief for 20 years, and he said he's never seen anything like this before. And it was very encouraging talking to him because our communities need us. I know that, but it's good to hear that. I try to tell my officers that all the time. I don't think there's a more important time to be a police officer. I don't think we could ever be more relevant, more impactful, more ability to make a difference. But it's hard. It's very hard. What happened in Minneapolis has, and rightfully so, has an effect on the rest of the nation. Whether we like it or not, people are angry because that didn't happen here, but other things have happened here. People have been impacted here by racism, by overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, by not having good schools, by getting disproportionately impacted by flooding, by not having good transportation. I could go on and on, not housing. I could go on and on. There's a big gap between the haves and the have-nots, and it's right along race lines. And we have a lot of room for improvement in policing. And I think as a nation, we have a lot of room for areas that we need to be thinking about and addressing. And the cops are struggling. There's a few that are leaving. Every chief that I've talked to, they've lost a few. Some agencies more than others. New York City, Atlanta, other parts of the country, LA. I mean, they're leaving in droves. The people here, I believe, little things like making sure that we hydrate them, that we're feeding them, that we're giving them rest when we can, that we're trying to give them a day off. There's guys and gals who went 14 days with no days off. Some of them working super long hours. And imagine doing that and people are villainizing you and they're throwing things at you and they're cursing at you and they're calling you a racist and they're so angry for all the things that have occurred in our country over the last 400 years and all the things that have occurred in our community and all the things that have occurred in our profession that are bad. And I have never worked with such good people in my life as the men and women of this organization. And I'm not a real emotional guy, but you can get me really emotional when I think about that. And we have a lot of room for improvement. I've talked to Max. He's vocal. He's smart. I love this guy. He's going to be our mayor one day. But he's not afraid to speak his mind, just like you. But somewhere in the middle of all that is going to unite us. That's my hope, my prayer. And I think that where we can get united is around meaningful change, embracing this audit, embracing not just, hey, let's ban chokeholds, or make sure you don't have a policy, which Minneapolis actually had a policy to allow for that. That's just like one step in 100. Like I tell our guys, this is a marathon, and we're on like mile 2. But I appreciate you asking that. I think we need to have thick skin. I think we need to be listening more and talking less. Sometimes that's one of my biggest faults. I'm the chief, so I need to talk, but I need to listen more. And so we need to be open to criticism. But I would be totally remiss if I didn't answer that in a way that was honest. And that is that it is extremely, extremely hard on our troops. Very painful time for all of us.
Chief, I imagine the financial side's a big deal too. A lot of these police officers have to have second jobs. I mean, they're off-duty jobs to supplement their living income, which is all dried up. So I would think there's a big financial burden right now.
There's imagine that you have to be embedded in protest groups. We have people who are out with COVID now, and some of them really, there's some great people. And if I didn't convey this very well, I apologize. I'm glad somebody called me out on it. There are some great people in the Black Lives Matter movement. Some of the, just salt of the earth, amazing people. So we become, I almost want to say friends, colleagues, co-workers in this effort. And some of them have gotten COVID, and we've gotten COVID. We've probably given it to each other in this process. And imagine, I have somebody, an employee of mine whose mother just died, 53 years old of COVID. I'm sure there's people in this room, maybe know others who have. That's kind of scary when I think about bringing that to my wife. I'm not vulnerable, but my wife would be. She's in one of those categories. But we can't stop coming to work. We never have stopped coming to work. And so it's scary, the violence. It's scary, the fact that somebody could die of COVID and we're all exposed to it every day. It's scary that we are being vilified because of the many good reasons. There's a lot of good reasons for this movement. And a lot of good things have already come out of it, and I think more good will come out of it. But yes, there has been a financial impact. Our businesses that were hurt by this protest, many of them will never come back again. It pains me to go up and down King Street right now until we get them fully on their feet again. That's our job as a city, as a police department, as a community. We have got to get them back on their feet and operating at 100% capacity. And even without the riots, they were already right on the razor's edge. And so that made it that much worse. I've talked to businesses who had to spend $50,000 or more just on the glass, but that's only one part of the expense. And the trauma is significant, and we've got a lot of healing to do. And I think we have an opportunity here.
And Chief, I believe the members of this council agree with you on that. We see this as an opportunity. These are certainly challenging times. We recognize that many times you can't really address the challenge unless it's put right up in front of your face. And certainly we've got many issues that we as community have up in front of our faces and the police department's faces. And we really want to ensure that we're able to work through these issues and show some, snatch the low-hanging fruit, of course, but show some true, genuine improvements within a number of areas. So thank you so much for your heartfelt statements. Council members, I sincerely appreciate you taking the time to do this virtual experience here tonight, because as you see, there is much work still to do, and Chief has already acknowledged that. I do want to mention that looking at the agenda and cognizant of the time, we've missed 2 items on the agenda, that screening process for new hires and officer development and promotion process. So if those 2 items could be played, if everyone will agree, we can place those 2 items on the next meeting's agenda. I think the information, I hope you feel that the information shared here tonight was extremely value added and critical for such a time as this. We also have set up 2 community work groups, policy procedure review group. I think Jerome Harris, you wanted to be on that group. I think that
Yes, ma'am.
laughter means yes. Thank you, sir. Anyone else who would like to join that group, please again, send an email to me by next Friday. The traffic stops work group. We have Bob, Cam, and Ann. Those 3 have been chatting in the chat box with me, letting me know they'd like to be on that work group. If there's anyone else who would like to be on that, and then Wendy, we'll get with you and Captain Thompson on actually getting those effectuated, getting the information that we need to effectively work and come back together. With that said, again, I do want to thank everyone for their time and commitment. And the next meeting, Captain Thompson, Steve, Bethany, and Wendy, would you all suggest another meeting time for us?
Well, I believe at the last meeting, according to the minutes, there was a discussion about meeting every other month, but I would, and I feel comfortable speaking for Chief on this. I think we need to meet a little bit more frequently. And so, you know, within the next month would be ideal.
Our guidelines do allow for that. And as a matter of fact, we did look at that some time ago, meeting more frequently. Some of the members are already chatting, saying they agree to meet more frequently. So how about set up something for us for next month? If you could send an email feeler out, we could see the best time to do the meeting, and then we can get that all set and do the announcements accordingly. Community members not on the council, but those who have joined us by Zoom or called in by conference call, we sincerely, or by YouTube, we sincerely appreciate the time you've taken to participate. I've looked at the number of participants and it's very healthy. So thank you so very much. We look forward to you participating again at our next meeting. If you have any questions, any comments you would like to share between that time, please feel free to send an email to either your council representative from your district or send it directly to Bethany, whose email address I believe was on the contact information listed on the speaks when you were registering to speak for tonight's meeting, so that we can ensure that we are inclusive of those comments. With all hearts and minds clear, thanks again for your time, and everyone please have a great evening. At this time, council members, do you agree for adjournment?
Yes.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you. Everyone have a great evening. Be safe. It is pouring outside.
You too.
Thank you.